Today we have a Smith's Carbine. Came in from a friend's shop. He had a guy just drop it off. Said that he has had this in an attic for a long time. Wasn't quite sure if it still worked or anything about it, but we're able to get it, and it's a really good example of one. These are somewhat rare to find, not too rare, but they made about 30,000 of them during the Civil War, and this definitely needs some TLC to get it back to where it needs to be. So we're going to do a restoration work. We're going to tear everything down. We're going to go through those processes that you've seen in the previous video with the G43. We're going to spend some quality time on the wood here. So in the G43, the wood was just flaking apart because it was down in the dirt. This not being in the dirt, being in an attic, just has 160 years of tarnish on that. So we'll clean it up quite well because it's worth it. On the back side, you can see this is a cavalry model, which most of them all were, has the ring. But we also have very nice inspector marks. So we want to preserve those and just use something here to get this cleaned up and bring that wood right back. I'll get in on the manufacturer's marks. So it is a Pulteney Rimble out of Baltimore. I believe there was 2 companies that were subcontracting these out, but under Massachusetts Arms. Everything on it works for the most part. The little lever on the bottom clicks. It does open up. It's a little rusty and dirty, but outside of that, it's in really good shape. The lock works quite well. The nipple's in good shape. We're just missing a spring for the rear sight. But we'll get all of this rust off the barrel, and we'll definitely clean up the bore, which I'm sure is pitted. They always are going to be pitted. And we'll do some work on this butt plate. It's a little crunchy. So we'll dynamite all this apart here, and we'll get going on taking all the screws and everything apart. The first thing we're going to do is let some oil soak on these screws, because obviously someone's been in here before. You can see the screw heads are a little bit rounded off. But before we take any screws out, any of them, we want to just soak oil. Let this stuff just get down in there. Any oil works. Some people use WD-40. There's nothing wrong to use here as long as it has lubricating features to it, so to speak. Everything's got to get oil down into these screws. And I'm going to let these sit for about an hour. Everything we want to take apart, just got to get penetrating oil to some degree on it. And we're going to let those sit. And we'll come back in an hour and see what we can screw off of these without ruining anything. All right, we've let these soak for a little while. What we're going to do here is we're going to take off this 4-end piece, and we're going to start to take these screws off here on the bottom. So I've identified the right sized flathead screwdrivers that we need, because right here on this barrel band there's a very small little flathead screw, and we're going to try to make sure we put enough downward pressure and it turns very easily. If there was any force there, we would wait and let that oil penetrate down more, but that came out pretty easily. So there's no barrel band spring in this wood. It's just this tiny little screw. Yeah, it looks like it. All right, we'll spend a little time on that. See if these loosened up. Yeah, actually, not too bad. Just go slow with everything. And looking at the shank of these screws as they come out, I don't see a lot of really, oh, that's really loose, crazy rust down alongside of them. It's quite a small screw. So that's good. That means down inside of this, there's really nothing that would be cancerous or concerning. It's just surface from what it looks like. Yeah, that screw underneath there is very nice and clean. It kind of gives us a little bit of an inclination of what we're going to be getting into. All right, let's see if we can get this band to come off. I don't want that wood to chip or split. So before we work on that barrel band, we're going to see if we can separate these two halves. Yeah, that's nice. It came pretty easy. Nothing's fighting so far. Pretty clean on the inside. Okay. I'll work on this fore end. Find the best way to hold it. I'm going to do some light taps. Let's see what we can get to move. It's moving just very slowly. And we don't want to hurt that wood, so we're not in a rush here. It's very slow. I'm not touching the wood at all. Go side to side. Try to move this evenly. Make sure the wood isn't coming with me off. There we go. So it's off pretty easy. So I want to look at the inside of this. It's probably hard to pick up on the camera, but nothing too crazy on the inside. Yes, a little bit of rust, but I don't see any heavy pitting in there, meaning there wasn't water, moisture for a long period of time sitting under that. And this wood has no cracks or splits. It looks very nice on the inside, so which means if we use a little steel wool and water, we probably can, soapy water, we could clean this wood and not have to sand anything. We're going to try to avoid that as much as possible. I don't want to take any of that wood away. So underneath this metal, very nice, very clean, no pitting. We have a serial number there and a maker's mark here. But everything looks nice and clean on the metal. That's that part. Let's see about getting the wood off of this. Do just little wiggles. It's probably got a lot of oil and crud around this rim. So what I'm going to do is put some padding in the vise and grab the metal stock section. Or actually grab the wood, and we'll tap on the metal section to see if we can get it to separate just a little bit. So we want to avoid blowing out any chips around this tang here towards the bottom. Move you over a little. So we're just going to do light taps. Oh, came right off. Perfect. Back side of that metal's very nice and clean. And we got a crack here in the wood. So we're going to see about repairing that before we put it back together. Well, it seems pretty solid, so before we do anything more, I'm going to take the rest of this hardware out here. But I want to soak some more stuff in oil, and we'll come right back. All right, let's see if we can get some of these other parts and pieces off. Just let some oil soak a little bit more on these so before we try to remove any wood. All right, they're coming pretty easy. These bars are almost always bent to some regard. I'm going to leave it that way. I'm not going to try to repair that bend. To me, that's part of its history and character, but you can straighten that if you like. These just screw in. Take the ring off. Those threads are really nice under there. A little dirty, but clean, rust free. Let's turn this around, look on the hammer. Trying to be careful when I put this back into the vise because we saw that crack line under the wood, so I don't want to squeeze that too hard. And this comes. All right, good. A lot of times these are frozen on, but those threads are very nice and clean. We're going to see if we can just tap on this a little bit and get it to come free. If not, we're going to let it soak just a little bit more. Oops, not really moving too much. We're going to soak that one with a little bit more oil. In the meantime, we'll see if we can get this one to go. No, we don't want to force it just yet. We'll let a little bit more oil and time soak in on that. So I did a little side work here off camera. I was able to get this side screw out for the nipple and unscrew that nipple, which wasn't easy, but a 1/4 inch wrench works pretty good on these older style nipples, but they're not uniform. So this is narrower this way. If you turn it, it's wider that way. So you can only grab it from one side with that little 1/4 inch wrench. I don't have the correct nipple wrench for these guys, but you can get by with a 1/4 inch and then a adjustable crescent to get on that other side. And with working in conjunction with those, you can slowly turn it and get it to come out. It wasn't too stiff, but still rusty enough. The inside of this has got some pitting, naturally, from being fired, but the hole through it is perfectly clear. It's not obstructed or crusted over. So we can reuse that. And looking down inside of this flash hole, this is a crucial point too. We need to make sure that that hole is nice and clean and clear, and it doesn't have big erosion through there or heavy pitting that it's compromised, and it's not. So it comes through into this burn area here quite well, so we can clean this up. This will be a decent shooter once it's put back together. So let's see if we can get this hammer to come off now. It's also been soaking while we were doing everything else, but we want that to be all the way down. Take all the tension off of that spring on the inside. And now we can, with a punch, just work this back and forth. starting to go. We just want to be very light with it. Oops, walking off. Never be in a rush for these steps. Just let the oil soak in. Come back a little later and just go back and forth with it. In, out, in, out, in, out until it slides off. Because if we bend this, that's the end of it. So this is very clean. It's not marred up. It's not destroyed. But that hammer came off pretty well. Just light little taps. We didn't hurt anything. But everything on this is pretty clean. It's straight. It's not bent. And this isn't marred up underneath there. So now we want to try to take off this side plate. Find the right way to hold it. Let's see if this screw lightened up a little bit from soaking. Oh, and it did. Nice. Didn't have to put any heat on that. So this has a little side plate right here that comes off to expose everything inside. No rust on the inside of that, which is great, because hopefully there's no horrible rust on the inside of this. So we got to be careful with this plate. Just light taps. There it goes. Easy. Okay. And beautiful. We got a nice serial number on the inside of that door. It matches the rest of the gun. It's got a nice case color on the inside. These were originally case colored on the outside, but I definitely don't expect that to still be there. Now on the inside of this, we have all the tension off of that mainspring. And we will start to undo the screw for the trigger. And once we do that, we should be able to pull the rest of the spring out and the cocking piece. But I want that to have some oil soaked into it. Everything here should have a good dose of oil on it as we take this out. I don't want anything to stick or bind. So we're going to let that sit for about 20 minutes, let's say, give or take, and then we'll extract those. All right, so doing a little bit more digging. This long bolt comes up through the back side. So I was trying to get the butt plate off, and that screw head was really tough. I had to put some heat on the back of this to break this, to break this seal free here. But then this all the way up here stuck underneath. I ended up putting some oil down through these screw holes, and it soaked down through and loosened this rod up. So this rod goes in that far and connected to the back. So we should be able to tap this out now and move this forward from the wood. But man, that was a tough one to get off. So this should just walk right up off of this stock now. Just go lightly because I don't want to hurt that wood. So that's what's holding it in. This big mainspring needs to come off. That's what's holding this guy inside. So let's see how easy that comes off. We're going to repair this wood. Put a little Acro glass down on that crack and seal that up. Man, that wood is incredible. Let's see if we can get this mainspring off. I don't have any oil on this. We'll just see if it wants to go. Yep, it does. I'm gonna want to grab that so it doesn't fly off. Anytime you're taking a mainspring off, you always got to leave it under tension while you take this screw. The hole will never line up and you'll just end up stripping the threads. Beautiful, beautiful threads on that. And then we'll relieve this slowly. Okay. And it's just a long hooked spring. Yeah, it's a massive spring. Now that comes straight out. This has a little toggle on it. And that's what hooks under that mainspring. Okay, so everything from the buttstock section is ready to put into the conserve pot. Let's see if we can get this mainspring off the top. This has been soaking in oil for about 4 or 5 hours. But that top screw is pretty chewed up. That's pretty tight. We may have to put some heat on that. Problem is this thing is tapered. There we go. See what that did. It's still pretty tight, so we're going to soak that in something different here because that top screw is pretty screwed up. See how far we can get with it. So we're back here with everything in our pot. We're going to be boiling this for about an hour today. It's in the water. I couldn't get that mainspring off the top. That screw is really boogered up, and after putting some heat on there wasn't any movement. So we're gonna boil this. Maybe there might be some afterward, but I didn't want to force that screw. It's pretty rough. So we'll see what we can do to clean that screw up and maybe get a better flat screw driver head to get in there. But everything's sitting. We're gonna boil this and we're gonna cover it with aluminum foil so it sits in there and really heats up. And we'll see what it looks like after an hour. While everything is in the pot cooking, we want to revisit this wood here. We know we have nice inspection marks on the other side that we want to save and preserve, but we have to clean this wood. It's just been sitting around for quite a long time, so there's grime, oils, things like that are all around the outside as well as into this wood. I don't really necessarily want to get all the oils out and start over again. It's because a lot of those are actually preserving the wood. But we can take some light steel wool and we can just go over the outside, because I don't want to remove wood from here. So I'm not going to sand anything at all. These dents, these dings, they're all character. We're going to keep those. But by going over this with the steel wool, we're just cleaning the outside. We're not going to do a full refinish of this. And then as we go over this here and take this dirt off, what we do at the end is I'm going to take just a little furniture oil. Some people call it Danish oil. The gun companies call it true oil. I'm just going to take some stuff like that and put that over the outside, let the wood soak it back in. But before we put that oil on, we're going to fix that crack on the bottom of this too. So I'm going to go over this with this steel wool, and I'm not pressing very hard. We're just kind of going over this with some light pressure from like 2 fingertips pushing down on this, because if all these little dents and dings, I don't want to chip or split wood off. So as you can see, this mung is kind of coming off of here. And it's literally just dirt and some of the outside finish. So I'm going to do this and go over this and the handguard. And then you can see at the end what the wood looks like before we put any oil or anything like that back on top. I'm probably going to get a little soapy water after this too, just to clean the wood off before we oil anything. And it's not going to be dumping water on this. It's just going to be a damp cloth with a little bit of soap. So it should dry really quickly, because I don't want a lot of water or moisture to soak down into the wood per se. It's mostly just to wipe off any excess stuff before we oil. So I'm going to go over all of this, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. All right, so we boiled for an hour and 20 minutes. This stuff is pretty thick, so I just let it go a little bit longer, but I want you to see here what that rust looks like now. It's like really flaky, dusty kind of looking, and that's what we want. We're converting that rust over so that we can just use our carding wheel and just cart it right off. And we'll see the bluing that's left underneath. So that actually has really nice bluing through the bottom, and I'm sure a lot more will come back up as we cart this stuff off. And we'll see if there's anything really, really crusty that's left on there, and if so, we'll go back and boil for a little bit longer. Like that's one of the more rustier type pieces. So we'll see what comes off of that, but particularly the little side panel. But we'll get to brushing this stuff off with this. It's not a wire wheel, it's a carding wheel. It's really soft, but it acts like steel wool. And just brush it right off, and we'll see what these parts look like after that. Now everything is carted off, and we can take a look at how much color has come back. An original color, I should say, the bluing. He's originally had a case hardening color to him. And I gotta get inside of that and clean that out. But beautiful color back on these parts. This is all its original coloring. But the barrel is beautiful, especially underneath. Just stunning. Oops. And we'll go over this and clean it a little bit more. Now obviously from the barrel being exposed, it's got some pitting on there. But not bad. I wouldn't say this needs to go back in for anything. That front sight's like almost shiny again. That plate came out well. This guy was the worst. But cleaned up quite well. A lot of that crud came off. And we'll do a little bit more cleaning, just with some brushes. But overall, this stuff came out very, very nice on the first pass. I don't think we have to do anything else, meaning going back into the pot. So we'll go back down, we'll take a look at our wood that we got. I was repairing some of the cracks, so I put some of the acrylic on there for it to harden up. So we'll see the wood after it's been all steel wooled off and right before we put our oil on, but we'll reassemble as much of this as we can and we'll go from there. Okay, here we are back at the wood. I wanted to show and take a look at how this comes out after we steel wool everything. I had a little split that was on the corner here, so we just reapplied our glue, and it's gluing currently right there. Everything's still a little wet, so we're gonna let it sit. I have this pinched because we had that crack that ran right through there. That acryglass is going to seal up. I put actually some steel wool fibers down into that too to help that bind. But this looks really, really, I don't want to say clean, but it's definitely got the dirt and stuff off of it. It hasn't been wiped down with a soapy rag yet. We're still a little on the dirty side, which is fine. We want that crack to seal up first. But those markings are beautiful. So that's the benefit of the steel wool over any kind of sandpapers. We want to preserve these. And when we oil these, they'll probably pop and come back up a little bit. But the top of the comb, everything's nice and even how we took the dirt and debris off. So we'll let this sit and harden up. Just keep things pinched just ever so slightly. But that'll probably take overnight to really harden up well. But I'm gonna start put these pieces back together here. We're gonna clean off just a couple small cracks and crevices that we can't get to with the big wheel. And we'll start to put everything back together. So I'm gonna continue cleaning on this, and then we'll jump back in for a reassemble. So to spare you the fighting of getting things back together, we got it to this point here. And when you're putting these back together, it's helpful to put the trigger in first, then this spring in that orientation, because you have to bend this arm back to slide it down over that pin. Then you can drop in that piece there and hook up your mainspring. Pinch the mainspring together and then screw that in. So that's the current way that this would go back together, but instead of fighting in front of the camera, sometimes it's easier just to show you that way. And then we will try to fight to get this guy back on in its orientation here, because the hammer actually needs to be manipulated on that mainspring to fit down in there. So we'll get that put on. This screw will hold the plate on, and then we'll put our ring, cavalry ring, back on. And then we'll work on the stock. We're gonna oil the stock and get that nice and clean before we put it back onto here. And then it's just literally connecting the two halves with that bolt. But we still have to clean the bore on the barrel. So I'm gonna scrub that out with oil, mops, and steel brushes and try to get that clean. But this is the main part I want to get back together. And all the writing on here is really, really nice. All right, we'll start working on that. So everything's back together. It's kind of easier to do it off camera here, just by pushing pins, and you're just running screws back together. There really isn't anything too much of a trick besides what we looked at in here. But I want to put some oil on this wood. What we're going to do here is just put a little bit on a paper towel and just slowly spread it around. Little goes a long way. You don't need a lot. It's just this true oil type stuff. And we're just going to give a really nice coat and let this wood drink it in since we opened the pores on everything. It's just sitting here. This wood was really, really dry. So we need a good thick oil that's going to drink down into it. Just try to get as even as a coat as possible across everything. Don't worry about metal parts. It's not going to hurt it. And we'll eventually wipe some of that stuff off, but on the metal, doesn't matter. But now we went from that wood looking really dirty. There's still a little schmutz coming off of it, but we did wipe it down before. For example, it was looking really dirty before, and now it's got a much lighter color to it. You'll see the dents and dings will have the dark color still back into it, but it's uniform. I mean, I don't want to take away all its character. And then those nice ordnance marks will pop as soon as it starts to drink it in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do the front and put the barrel band back on. And then this is pretty much coming to an end. We'll close with it. So we've come to the end here of another restoration. I think it looks wonderful. We've gotten all the rust off. We've converted everything over. And the oil is pretty much drying into the wood. So that's going to do it for this one. Sharp's carbine. Sorry, Smith's carbine, not a Sharp's. Preserved, back to be stored, and hopefully someday fired. All right, we'll see you on the next one.